What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so continuing our Marvel cosmic stuff, really kind of like following the Thanos chronology of things. At this point, we pick up with Thanos' second death. And it's kind of interesting because, remember, this is all part of that whole Jim Starlin run. This is one of the reasons why Jim Starlin was so important as a writer, is because he kind of fleshed out and expanded the Marvel cosmology that really led to the works of guys like Dan Abnett, people along those lines. But the idea here was that following the original Cosmic Cube saga, the Cosmic Cube story, whatever you want to call it, the whole idea was that Thanos had effectively been defeated. And when the Cosmic Cube had been destroyed by Captain Marvel, what ended up happening is Marvel had effectively used the energies to kind of set things back to the way they were before. And what it did is it allowed Jack Kirby to sort of refresh things to a degree, in the sense that Thanos just kind of ended up in the center of the universe, and then it allowed him to kind of go among his various schemes and plans and different things along those lines. Now, following that, and what we covered in our Adam Warlock Explained video, was that Starlin then went into something that focused exclusively on Adam Warlock that was called the Magus Trilogy. And what ended up happening with the Magus Trilogy is it basically grabbed the character of Adam Warlock, who had already been like a Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Roy Thomas kind of character, and was really more of like a baseline messianic superhero as opposed to like a cosmic hero. Warlock had been elevated to the cosmic level by Jim Starlin. And the Magus saga basically detailed this idea that somewhere along the line in the distant future, Adam Warlock would be corrupted by the Soul Gem, just because of the fact that of all the Infinity Gems that are out there, the Soul Stone kind of has a mind of its own, in the sense that it hungers for the souls of people who wield it. And if they don't protect themselves adequately, it'll take their souls. And so they'll just kind of be locked inside the Soul Stone forever. Now, the result was that when Thanos had returned, what he'd realized, or at least what he'd done, is he'd effectively read this old scroll. And that's one of the things that's really kind of hinted at here, in the sense that Adam Warlock, really just kind of making his way throughout the cosmos and so on and so forth, ultimately comes across Gamora. Now, part of the Magus saga was introducing Gamora as basically a girl who was part of a group called the Zinwo-Bears. They were really just kind of like a pacifist race, and their race had been totally obliterated, save for Gamora, who was one of the only survivors. And Thanos had basically taken her and then made her into a personal assassin with cybernetic augmentation, honing combat skills, different things like that, and made her the most formidable assassin in the entirety of the universe. And so when Adam Warlock shows up and basically Gamora has effectively been taken out, the question is, who did it, why, and what's the next step? And so what this does is this transitions over to the Avengers themselves. And it's kind of interesting because there are a few characters here that I do want to talk about for a second. Well, really only one, to be honest. There is a character named Moondragon, and we did talk about the origin of Moondragon, how her character evolved, how she progressed, but she's basically a girl named Heather Douglas. She's the daughter of Drax the Destroyer. And again, one of the things that we hit on was that when Thanos had initially showed up on Earth, as part of like a scouting mission, that he had been spotted by the family of Arthur Douglas. Arthur Douglas, his wife, and his daughter. And so Thanos basically destroyed the vehicle of Arthur Douglas, killed Arthur, killed his wife, and was believed to have killed Heather. But Heather survived. She was taken by the father of Thanos and had her telepathic powers developed. And so as a result, Heather Douglas, Moondragon, without any real like external augmentation, which is to say like when Jean Grey inhabits the Phoenix Force or something along those lines, Heather Douglas is one of the top telepaths in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. But much like, Drax the Destroyer, she harbors a desire to see the destruction of Thanos. So it's one of those interesting things that goes on. The problem with this is that while they're discussing events that have unfolded, and Moondragon really kind of shows up and says, we have a major problem. When the question is why, what she says is someone's traveling around the cosmos blinking out stars. They're basically destroying stars. And so because of the fact that Moondragon's telepathy is so incredibly powerful, it's almost like that scene from Star Wars, where like Alderaan's destroyed and then Obi-Wan Kenobi feels it through the Force. That's how it is with Moondragon. The entire population of various planets are totally obliterated, and Moondragon effectively kind of feels that through her telepathy and feels all those lives being snuffed out, all the fear they feel in the blink of an eye, and suddenly, a fraction of a second, they're all basically gone. Now at this point, one of the things I also want to talk about is the idea of Beast being rolled over into the Avengers. So back during the events of Avengers number 137, Hank McCoy was kind of inducted into the Avengers proper, not really inducted proper, he was kind of inducted as like a probationary member. It wasn't until 151 or 157 that he was actually inducted into the team properly. But the whole idea was that back in the 1970s, I guess in the 1970s, the whole shakeup at Marvel when it came to the X-Men was trying to find a way to like reinvigorate interest in the team per se. And when Beast initially gained his blue fur, that was an event or an attempt to kind of try to shake him up a little bit. But over the course of publications like Amazing Adventures and Marvel Adventures, it was an attempt to kind of like rework him. But that's the reason why he's here. He's just kind of a probationary member. One of the big controversial aspects of Jim Starlin writing Beast is that on the whole, Beast is kind of like a high intellect, kindly being, meaning that he is exceedingly smart and he's also really nice. One of the big problems people had is that Jim Starlin wrote Beast is kind of a dick, making fun of people's ideologies and like telepathy isn't really that relevant and things like that, which is kind of weird, especially considering he spent so much time alongside Jean Grey. So that was one of the things that a lot of people didn't really care for when it came to his whole thing, was him being so cynical. But what ends up happening is that in the middle of all this, the group is basically met by the arrival of Adam Warlock. Now keep in mind, for most of these guys, this is the first time they've met him, or it's really the second time they met him. Like in the case of Thor has not seen Adam Warlock since the first time they fought, when Adam Warlock was just him. Again, because of that, for a lot of these guys, they don't necessarily trust Warlock because they don't know him, or the last time they met, they were in conflict. And so because of this, with Moondragon being a probationary member of the Avengers and really kind of like being trusted by the team, ultimately she just kind of spills the beans and says, hey, look, this guy's a good guy. He's not here to work against us. He's here to work for us. For the most part, Warlock basically says, look, I'm aware of everything you guys have done in your first battle with Thanos, all those different things, when Thanos was rendered back to being immortal, when he was taken by his ship, so on and so forth. But what ended up happening is that when Thanos was defeated after the events of the Cosmic Cube saga, he was quote unquote abandoned by Mistress Death. And this is when it starts to bring into the whole idea of Thanos and Mistress Death in this kind of cat and mouse game, in the sense that Thanos chases Mistress Death and she runs away. But the whole idea is that when Thanos had basically been defeated, what he had done is he had looked to find a way to regain the affections of Mistress Death, and in doing so had actually searched a series of dead worlds, ultimately coming across a scroll that revealed the existence of the Infinity Stones. Now, this is where we really see Jim Starlin grab the stones and kind of bring them together as like very powerful artifacts. But this is the first time Thanos gains the Infinity Stones. This is not Thanos' quest. Thanos' quest basically redetails the whole idea of the Infinity Stones, but Thanos learns more about what they're capable of instead of what he learns here. All he really learns from this scroll is that these stones are wildly powerful, that if a person uses them, they'll have an extreme amount of power. He doesn't know about the Infinity Gauntlet yet. Again, all that comes during Thanos' quest. And so because of this, what he ends up doing is kind of like traversing the entirety of the universe and locating each one of these artifacts, each one of these stones. One of the first ones that he finds belongs to the Stranger. Thanos essentially breaks in, he steals it, and then he starts hopping across the cosmos, grabbing all these different Infinity Stones from all these different locations. Now, the only exception to this is the Soul Stone of Adam Warlock. And the reason why is because with the Soul Stone, again, being hungry and basically capturing the souls of individuals who don't necessarily guard it properly, Thanos' biggest concern was that he would basically lose his soul to the Soul Stone. And so that's where the whole Magus saga came into play. The idea was that Thanos needed the power of the Soul Stone, but didn't want to possess it, outright. And so what he did is when he realized that Adam Warlock was destined to become the Magus, he started putting in all these different schemes and these different plans that would basically ensure that future never really came to fruition. Instead, that future would just be an alternate reality or something like that. And one of the schemes involved like getting Gamora, turning her into an assassin. Another involved allying himself with Adam Warlock to defeat the Magus. And so because of these things, Thanos, what he was doing really all the while that he was working alongside Adam Warlock during the Magus saga, was actually siphoning off the energy of the Soul Stone without Adam Warlock realizing it. And so what had happened is Gamora had come across the plans of Thanos, where he intended to take all the energies of these Infinity Stones and combine them into a singular large synthetic gem, and then use that to start blinking out stars. And that's when Thanos turned on her, and that's where Adam Warlock picked up at the beginning of the story when Gamora had been defeated. And so again, because of the fact that Pip the Troll was kind of just a guy who was there and worked alongside Adam Warlock for a little while, his allegiances aren't necessarily guaranteed. For Pip the Troll, he was there during the Magus saga, and so he kind of considered himself to be a friend of Thanos and Adam Warlock. But the whole idea here is that because Pip the Troll is more allied with Adam than he is with Thanos, when he comes along into Thanos' ships, kind of starts poking around and begins to realize what's happening, Thanos effectively turns on him and says, well, we're effectively going to just have to do something to get rid of you or to remove you from this whole scenario. And so what this does is this picks up with the various superheroes trying to figure out what it is that's going on with regards to the forces of Thanos, where it is that he's at, and what he's trying to do. And so ultimately what ends up happening is Thanos' next move brings him to the Sol system, basically brings him to Earth, where he intends to blink out Earth's star. But again, it is kind of interesting because what ends up happening here is in the middle of this whole conflict with this army of Thanos that he's been using to basically keep himself protected, you end up having like Marvel of the Kree, you end up having Iron Man, and you end up having Thor basically like abandon the major conflict and then basically take off to the ship of Thanos. The problem with this is that when Adam Warlock, when he shows up, he ends up finding Pip the Troll is just kind of in a catatonic state. And so this begins, for those of you guys who read like or who saw my videos on Thanos Quest, which those will go back up, when we had the opening of the story, really I guess maybe it was Infinity Gauntlet, but when we had the opening of the story where Pip the Troll and Gamora and Adam Warlock were inside the Soul Stone, this is why that happens. Because in this particular moment, what ends up taking place here is Adam Warlock, because of the fact that the mind of Pip the Troll is destroyed, he basically takes his soul, his essence, and absorbs it into the Soul Stone. And so just kind of like leaves it there as a place where Pip the Troll could kind of experience eternity living in an idyllic paradise, as opposed to just kind of being locked away and stuck inside of his own mind. And so what this does is this transitions to really kind of like a massive battle between like Thor, Adam Warlock, Marvel of the Kree, and Iron Man, who show up on the actual ship of Thanos and begin the process of just destroying the giant synthetic Infinity Gem. Now, the funny thing about that is that in the midst of this whole thing, there's a couple things to keep in mind. If you were a reader of Marvel Comics back during the 1970s when this story came out, this was a huge deal. And the reason why is because of the fact that you had Marvel of the Kree, and then you had Adam Warlock. And there were characters who in a lot of ways had been like fleshed out and kind of built by Jim Starlin, despite the fact that he didn't necessarily create them. And so because of the fact, it would be like if Captain America and Iron Man met for the first time. It was a pretty big deal. The problem with this is that in the middle of this fight, you end up having Adam Warlock, really whose power is just kind of drained by Thanos, and ultimately he's basically just destroyed. And so it leaves like Thor and it leaves a handful of others to try to pick up the slack, and Iron Man of course destroys the synthetic gem. And so as a result of this, Thanos just kind of bails out, takes off, and then he's more or less like, you know, you guys are going to meet your final fate and you guys are going to be destroyed, you know, and that's really going to be about it. And so what ends up happening is Adam Warlock's essence really kind of like leaves the physical plane and he basically transitions to the Soul Stone. And this is when Adam Warlock really begins to learn more about the Soul Stone than he did before. Where Adam Warlock was aware of the fact that the Soul Stone would basically lock away the souls of people who didn't guard it adequately, at the end of the day, it was relatively interesting because having that information and experiencing that information are usually two distinctly different things. And when he enters into the Soul Stone and he meets not only former enemies who had their souls captured, as well as Gamora and Pip the Troll, he actually doesn't want to leave. And so what this does is it actually transitions to a line of comics called Marvel 2-in-1. Now, Marvel has relaunched this as part of Marvel Legacy, but it's basically just kind of an ongoing series with Johnny Storm and The Thing, which is kind of the basis for it. But originally, Marvel 2-in-1 was basically just a series where you would have a whole bunch of stories with The Thing, Ben Grimm, and he would just team up with other people. Now, the stories were contextual, largely because of the fact that Marvel 2-in-1 was really kind of had its popularity bolstered by Ben Grimm. The idea was to basically say, well, if you want to write a story that fits into a larger story that you're already telling, you can do it in Marvel 2-in-1 and then bolster the popularity of that story. Or if we're just looking to kind of fill a publication hole, we can just tell any regular story, it doesn't matter. It was just a team up book. But the fact remains here that what this does is it basically sees a team up between Ben Grimm and Spider-Man. And this is smart because remember, Spider-Man has always been Marvel's highest selling publication when it comes to individual solo superhero titles. And throwing him into this book bolstered the readership because it gave fans a reason who wouldn't normally read something like this to read it because it involves Spider-Man. And so as a result, what ends up happening is you end up having basically Moondragon use her telepathy to essentially blast the mind of Peter Parker with information on everything that's happened. Basically an attempt to say, hey, look, we need help. We can't do this on our own. Now, something else that I also want to talk about here is the introduction of Master Order and Lord Chaos. Order and Chaos are designed to represent exactly what they sound like, order and chaos. Neither one of them can be in absolute control. If chaos was in absolute control, the universe would just be kind of in shambles. It would be in pieces, it'd be weird. If order was the one running the show, everything would be exceedingly regimented and structured. And so these two represent diametrically opposing dichotomies in the sense that you have to have order combined with chaos. And so this introduction of these two cosmic beings really comes by way of, well, who knows how this will play out? Like if they walk the standard ordered superhero archetype, they'll win. But if someone throws a wrench in the works, they won't win. And so that's kind of what these two characters represent. And so you end up having Peter Parker who travels to go meet Ben Grimm. And it makes sense because for the most part, the Fantastic Four are like the premier group when it comes to charting the spaceways, when it comes to like going out in space and dealing with various conflicts. And so because of that, while we're not necessarily told why the Fantastic Four aren't here, which is to say why like Reed Richards, Susan Storm, and Johnny Storm aren't here, Ben Grimm basically just like takes a ship, him and Peter Parker board it, going to find Thanos, and ultimately like they jump in a fray with all the various forces that Thanos has at his disposal and so on and so forth. That part's pretty straightforward. Now, this was one of those unplanned things when it comes to Thanos, but keep in mind, while the modern day stories, really kind of illustrate the idea that Thanos is one of the smartest beings out there when it comes to like military strategy and overall knowledge of different things, these early stories really emphasize the idea that Thanos was just like a warlord. And so as time progresses, going into the future of these stories, the various experiences he has, like these, where he loses during the Cosmic Cube saga, where he experiences the afterlife, Mistress Death, things like that, that will all go towards bolstering up his abilities as a really one of the most powerful entities out there. And so what ends up happening here is that Adam Warlock, as he's in this Soul Stone, again, because of the fact that he doesn't necessarily want to leave, he kind of experiences this tugging of sorts, this pulling of sorts, in the sense that there are, well, really, it just kind of seems like the stone's sort of trying to spit him back out, that he's sort of destined to defeat Thanos, quote unquote. It's kind of ambiguous, but it is one of those interesting scenarios, because what ends up taking place is Thanos basically kind of reveals to Spider-Man and Ben Grimm what we already know, that he's basically been traveling around with the various stones, and of course he captured the Soul Stone of Adam Warlock. He's kind of holding it in stasis in a giant crystal ball of sorts, but his idea is to basically start blinking out stars, and he's looking to blink out the star of Earth, just because of the fact that Earth really harbors most of the threats, really most of the annoyances as far as Thanos is concerned. Now, where Ben Grimm and Spider-Man do the best they can to try to take out Thanos, ultimately they're successful to a degree, but Spider-Man just kind of like bails out. And it's kind of funny the way it's done, because he's just like, okay, look, so like this guy's really powerful and this guy could easily quash me, so I'm out. Peace, and just bails. Like he literally just takes off. But the funny thing about this is partway through, he begins to realize that if someone doesn't stop Thanos, then either Spider-Man's going to die at the hands of Thanos here, or Spider-Man's going to die when the Earth's sun's obliterated. And so either way, it seems like there's no real way for him to escape this fate unless he's able to, basically help defeat Thanos. And that's exactly what he does. What he ends up doing is kind of sneaking back aboard and then effectively destroy the prison compartment being used to kind of keep all the Avengers in stasis, which of course leads to them being freed, and then all of them fighting Thanos. Now, in the middle of all this, what ends up taking place is that the fight is actually pretty hardcore, but this is something that I want you guys to notice. The way this is done is not really the way we would expect it to see. Back the way Thanos was done back in, back in this era, back in this line of storytelling, he was more of a grounded character. He was a person who could be defeated. Nowadays, we would never expect this. Thanos is a being who's so incredibly powerful right now in the modern day. Thanos would wreck them all single-handedly without any real effort whatsoever. It would be no contest, but that's the evolution of Thanos. That's the various abilities he's gained over the years, combined with his experience and wisdom in fighting these guys before. But what ends up happening here is, of course, because of the fact that Adam Warlock is feeling this kind of continual tug from the Soul Stone, when Peter Parker just kind of like knocks over this encasing and basically destroys the housing of the Soul Stone, Adam Warlock emerges and then essentially just seizes Thanos and turns him to stone. Now, again, this is classic Marvel. We're not given like a line-by-line indication of exactly what was done. We're just told he's turned into solid granite, done. And that's really it. It's pretty straightforward and it's pretty simple, but all this was designed to do is basically show that Thanos is effectively defeated, that Thanos is essentially gone. And so because of this, Adam Warlock just kind of retreats back into the Soul Stone again, and he's just sort of left there. He alongside Gamora and Pip the Troll just sort of reside inside the Soul Stone, and at some point or another, they may or may not come back. But what this was designed to do is basically put Adam Warlock, Gamora, and Pip the Troll on the back burner. It was a way for Jim Starlin to kind of flesh out other things outside of this particular line of comics so that he could basically bring back Adam Warlock, Gamora, and Pip the Troll during the events of Infinity Gauntlet. So again, just kind of sitting them in the storage shed and bringing him back out when he wants them again. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.